From the death train at Dachau containing over 3,000 emaciated bodies piled upon one another, to the gas chambers of Auschwitz, where victims were systematically killed using Zyklon B, to the resistance in the Warsaw Ghetto, where over 400,000 Jews were imprisoned in horrific conditions. These are the most chilling moments ever recorded inside the camps. Let's begin. The Dachau Death Train, April 29, 1945. On April 29, 1945, as American forces of the U.S. 45th Thunderbird Division approached what they believed would be another military objective, they encountered something that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. These were battle-hardened soldiers who had witnessed over 500 days of combat across Europe, men who thought they had seen the worst that war could offer. They were tragically, horrifically wrong. The discovery of the Dachau death train stands as one of the most shocking moments in the liberation of Nazi concentration camps. Nearly 40 rail cars sat on a sidetrack near the camp's entrance, and what they contained defied comprehension. Approximately 2,000 to 3,000 prisoners lay dead in various stages of decomposition, their emaciated bodies piled upon one another in a grotesque tableau that spoke to the Nazi regime's complete disregard for human life. The train's journey had begun on April 7, 1945, when prisoners were evacuated from Buchenwald concentration camp as American forces approached. What followed was a 21-day odyssey through Saxony, Czechoslovakia, and Bavaria that transformed a transport of human beings into a rolling tomb. The conditions on this train were beyond inhumane. They were deliberately designed to kill. Survivors reported being crammed so tightly that movement was nearly impossible, with up to 4,000 to 5,000 prisoners packed into cattle cars at the journey's start. The prisoners received rations for only one day, and as the train meandered through German-controlled territory, starvation became their constant companion. Water was rarely provided, and when buckets were occasionally refilled, desperate fights broke out among the dying passengers. The horror intensified as days turned into weeks. Reports indicate instances of cannibalism among prisoners driven to desperation, while SS guards shot those who could no longer continue or attempted escape. By the time the train reached Dachau, the majority of the prisoners were dead, their bodies left unattended in the wagons in advanced stages of decomposition. The SS refused the train entry into the camp, leaving it stranded on a sidetrack like a forgotten piece of cargo. Ben Lesser, a Holocaust survivor, recounted the nightmarish journey, describing how he and his cousin Isaac faced starvation, violence, and the constant presence of decomposing corpses for 4 weeks. Lesser was stabbed in the chin while fighting for bread, yet miraculously avoided infection despite the filthy conditions. He and Isaac were among only 816 survivors when the train arrived at Dachau on April 26, 1945. When American soldiers first encountered the train, they initially noticed an overpowering stench miles before reaching the camp, mistaking it for a chemical factory or burning feathers. As they approached and realized the smell emanated from human remains, the psychological impact was immediate and devastating. Many soldiers broke down in tears, while others were consumed by rage. The sight was described as a fuse that couldn't be snuffed out, amplifying the soldiers' horror as they proceeded into the camp itself. Our next story reveals what left even General Patton physically sick. Eisenhower's visit to Ohrdruf, April 12, 1945. On April 12, 1945, 3 of the most powerful military leaders in the Allied command structure made a journey that would forever change their understanding of the war they were fighting. General Dwight D. Eisenhower, accompanied by Generals George Patton and Omar Bradley, visited the Ohrdruf subcamp of Buchenwald shortly after its liberation by American forces. What they witnessed there would shock them to their core and fundamentally alter how the world understood the true nature of Nazi evil. Ohrdruf had been established in November 1944 as a subcamp of Buchenwald, designed to provide forced labor for constructing a railway to a planned communications center. The prisoners, Jews, Poles, Soviet POWs, and others, were subjected to brutal conditions, forced to dig tunnels through nearby mountains in backbreaking labor that claimed lives daily. By late March 1945, the camp held over 10,000 prisoners, but as American forces approached, the SS evacuated most on death marches to Buchenwald, killing those too weak to march. When the U.S. 4th Armored Division and 89th Infantry Division liberated Ohrdruf on April 4, 1945, they discovered the first Nazi concentration camp freed by American troops. The scene that greeted them was one of systematic murder and attempted cover-up. Piles of bodies lay scattered throughout the camp, some covered with lime, others partially burned on makeshift pyres constructed from railway tracks. Guided by a former prisoner and interpreter, First Lieutenant Alois J. Lethen, the 3 generals witnessed evidence of atrocities that defied comprehension. They They saw a burial pit filled with charred remains, the result of the SS's rushed attempts to destroy evidence of their crimes. During the evacuation, guards had burned bodies on a pyre made of railway tracks laid on brick foundations, doused with pitch and set alight with pine wood and coal. The attempt at destruction was incomplete, leaving visible bones, skulls, and torsos as damning evidence. The charred remains were particularly haunting because they represented victims who had been burned alive by the retreating SS. Photographs from the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum show Eisenhower viewing the gallows and a pile of partially burned bodies, evidence of the Nazis' desperate attempt to erase their crimes. Survivors demonstrated torture methods to the generals, including beatings and executions, which were also photographed for posterity. General Patton, a man hardened by years of warfare and known for his iron constitution, was so overwhelmed by what he saw that he vomited and refused to enter a shed containing roughly 30 emaciated corpses sprinkled with lime to mask the stench. Eisenhower, however, was determined to bear witness to every detail despite the overwhelming horror. His reaction was captured in a letter where he wrote, "The things I saw beggar description," anticipating that such atrocities might one day be denied. In his letter to General George C. Marshall on April 15, 1945, Eisenhower detailed the horrible sights and urged Marshall to visit. Understanding the historical significance of documentation, he ordered all nearby non-combat units to tour Ohrdruf and invited American media and Congress members to document the conditions. Eisenhower also implemented a policy that would be repeated at other liberated camps. He compelled local German civilians to view the camp and bury the dead. This confrontation with the reality of what had been done in their name was so traumatic that the mayor of Ohrdruf and his wife reportedly took their own lives afterward, unable to live with the knowledge of what had occurred in their vicinity. The next story follows two men with cameras risking death to document the unthinkable. Clandestine photography in the Lodz Ghetto. In the face of unimaginable oppression and the constant threat of death, two Jewish photographers in the Lodz Ghetto made a decision that would preserve one of the most important visual records of the Holocaust. Henrik Ross and Mendel Grossman risked their lives to document the brutal realities of life in the Lodz Ghetto, using their cameras as instruments of resistance against Nazi attempts to control the narrative of genocide. The Lodz Ghetto, established on February 8, 1940 and sealed on April 30, 1940, was one of the largest and most isolated ghettos during the Holocaust. Over 160,000 Jews were crammed into a 4.13 square kilometer area where they faced starvation, disease, and violence. Photography was strictly forbidden by both German authorities and the Jewish Council, with personal photography banned under penalty of death. Yet Ross and Grossman understood that someone had to bear witness. Henrik Ross, a professional photojournalist and sports photographer before the war, was employed by the Judenrat's Department of Statistics when confined to the ghetto with his wife, Stefania. His official duties included producing identification photographs for work permits and propaganda images showcasing the ghetto's productivity to appease the Nazis. But Ross had a deeper mission. He was anticipating the total destruction of Polish Jewry and wanted to leave a historical record of our martyrdom. The technical challenges of clandestine photography were immense. Ross ingeniously constructed a 3-level stage in his studio to photograph up to 12 people per negative, conserving precious film for his secret work. Both photographers often worked covertly, with Ross's wife Stefania serving as a lookout, scanning for SS guards or Jewish police who might discover their illegal activity. Mendel Grossman, a Lodz native known for his frail health and asthmatic condition, faced even greater physical challenges. He concealed his Leica camera under an oversized raincoat, manipulating it through cutout pockets to capture images discreetly. His photographs focused heavily on the daily struggles of ghetto life, including hunger, disease, and the gradual destruction of his own family. The penalties for discovery were severe: torture and execution for themselves and their families, yet they persevered, understanding the historical importance of their work. Ross described photographing a 1944 deportation through a hole in a wooden store after being locked inside for 14 hours, with conspiring workers later releasing him. This image shows the incredible risks these men took to document the truth. The content of their photographs reveals both the horror and humanity of ghetto life. Ross captured images of public hangings, deportations to Chelmno Birkenau and Auschwitz, and children waiting behind chain-link fences during the 1942 Sperre deportation, where nearly all children under 10 were taken and murdered. But he also photographed moments of resilience: birthday parties, couples in love, children playing, preserving evidence of the community's determination to maintain humanity in the face of dehumanization. Grossman documented the decline of his own family, capturing the deaths of his parents, brother-in-law, and nephew Yankel from starvation. His work was driven by a mission to leave behind a testimony for all generations about the great tragedy unfolding before his eyes. In August 1944, Grossman was deported to a labor camp and died during a forced march in April 1945, just days before the war's end. In 1944, anticipating the ghetto's liquidation, Ross buried over 6,000 negatives in tar-coated canisters at 12 Jagiellonska Street. After surviving as part of the cleanup crew and the ghetto's liberation, he retrieved the negatives in March 1945, though moisture had destroyed about half. The surviving 3,000 images form one of the most comprehensive visual records of the Holocaust. Yet even as these brave photographers captured the slow death of the ghettos, they had no idea that just miles away, the Nazis had perfected something far more sinister, a method of killing that turned murder into a science. Mass executions and gas chambers at Auschwitz-Birkenau. Of all the Nazi concentration camps, none has become more synonymous with the Holocaust than Auschwitz-Birkenau, where the industrialized murder of human beings reached its most horrifying efficiency. The Auschwitz-Birkenau complex, where over 1.1 million people were murdered, represented the epicenter of the Holocaust's mechanized killing, a place where death became a factory process designed to eliminate thousands daily. The camp's evolution into a killing center began after the 1942 Wannsee Conference formalized the final solution. Auschwitz I, originally established in 1940 for Polish political prisoners, was expanded to include Auschwitz II Birkenau in 1941, which became the primary extermination center. The scale of murder that followed defies comprehension. Approximately 1.3 million people were deported to Auschwitz, with about 90% of those killed being Jews. The gas chambers at Auschwitz-Birkenau represented the pinnacle of Nazi killing technology. The first experiments with Zyklon B occurred in September 1941, when the SS tested this hydrogen cyanide-based pesticide in the basement of Block 11 at Auschwitz-II, killing 600 Soviet POWs and 250 sick Polish prisoners. By 1943, the killing apparatus had reached industrial proportions. 4 large crematoria with gas chambers were built in Birkenau between March and June 1943. Crematoria 2 and 3 had underground gas chambers, each capable of killing 2,000 people at a time, while IV and V had ground-level chambers. One of the most chilling documented moments comes from the testimony of SS anatomist Johann Kremer, who after witnessing a gassing at Birkenau in September 1942 wrote in his diary, "Dante's Inferno seems to me almost a comedy compared to this. They don't call Auschwitz the camp of annihilation for nothing." This rare admission from a Nazi perpetrator reveals the horror even they recognized in their own actions. The process of mass murder was deliberately designed to deceive victims until the final moment. Victims were told they were going for disinfection or showers, a cruel deception that exploited their hope for basic human dignity. After undressing, they were packed into gas chambers where Zyklon B was dropped through openings in the ceiling. During the peak operations in 1943-1944, up to 6,000 Jews were gassed daily, particularly during the deportation of 426,000 Hungarian Jews in 1944. The crematoria struggled to keep pace with the killing, leading to the construction of open-pit burning sites where bodies were consumed by flames that could be seen for miles. The Sonderkommando, Jewish prisoners forced to assist in the gas chamber operations, provide some of the most heartbreaking testimony about these mass executions. These men were forced to remove bodies, process belongings, and burn corpses in the crematoria, living with the knowledge that they were participating in the murder of their own people to survive just a few more days or weeks. Survivor Maria Osowski described the dehumanizing arrival process at Auschwitz, where prisoners were stripped, shaved, and herded into cold showers under the watch of SS guards. The selection process at the Birkenau ramp, photographed by the SS and later recovered, shows men, women, and children being separated, most sent directly to gas chambers without even being registered as prisoners. The next story takes us to Warsaw, where fighters prepared for a battle they couldn't win. The Warsaw Ghetto Uprising and its aftermath. In the spring of 1943, in the bombed-out ruins of what had once been Warsaw's thriving Jewish quarter, approximately 700 to 1,000 Jewish fighters made a decision that would resonate through history. The Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, beginning on April 19, 1943, was not about achieving military victory. It was about choosing how to die, about maintaining human dignity in the face of certain annihilation. The Warsaw Ghetto had been established in November 1940, confining over 400,000 Jews in a 1.3 square mile area under conditions of deliberate starvation, disease, and overcrowding. By the summer of 1942, the Nazis had deported approximately 300,000 ghetto residents to the Treblinka extermination camp during the Gross-Action Warsaw, leaving about 50,000–60,000 survivors who now understood with devastating clarity that deportation meant death. The uprising began on the eve of Passover, a timing that held deep symbolic meaning for the Jewish fighters. As SS and police forces under SS Brigade Führer Jürgen Stroop entered the ghetto to complete its liquidation, they expected little resistance. They were met instead with fierce opposition from fighters armed with pistols, rifles, homemade explosives, and Molotov cocktails, weapons smuggled in or crafted in secret workshops throughout the ghetto. The Jewish Combat Organization, EGOB, led by 23-year-old Mordecai Anielewicz, had 300 up to 500 fighters organized into 22 units, while the Jewish Military Union, WW2, led by Pavo Frenkel, fielded about 250 fighters. The fighting was intense and brutal. Key battles occurred at intersections like Gensia and Nalewki streets and Miła and Zamenhofer streets, where insurgents threw grenades and petrol bombs from rooftops and windows. The GZW held Muranowska Square, where they raised a Jewish flag alongside a Polish flag as a symbol of defiance that could be seen throughout Warsaw. The German forces, initially caught off guard by the intensity of resistance, soon retaliated with overwhelming firepower. Stroop ordered the systematic burning of buildings block by block, using flamethrowers and poison gas to flush out those hiding in bunkers and sewers. By April 26th, Stroop reported the need for relentless force, and by May 8th, the Jobbik headquarters at 18 Miła Street was surrounded. In that bunker, Anielewicz and over 100 fighters faced their final choice. Rather than be captured alive, many chose suicide or died from asphyxiation as German forces pumped gas into their hiding place. Their bodies, when found, bore witness to their determination to die as free Jews rather than live as Nazi victims. The aftermath of the uprising was as brutal as the fighting itself. Approximately 7,000 Jews died during the 28 days of fighting, with another 7,000 deported to Treblinka and murdered immediately upon arrival. The 42,000 survivors were sent to forced labor camps like Poniatowa, Trauniki, and Majdanek, where most would later be killed during Operation Harvest Festival in November 1943. Stroop declared the ghetto no more on May 16, 1943, symbolically destroying the Great Synagogue on Tłumacki Street to mark the end of Jewish resistance. The entire ghetto was razed, leaving only rubble where a vibrant community had once lived. Yet the uprising's true significance lay not in its military impact, but in its symbolic power. The revolt inspired resistance in other ghettos and camps, proving that Jews would not go passively to their deaths. The courage of these fighters, armed with little more than determination and homemade weapons, challenged the world's understanding of victimhood and resistance. Our next story reveals another form of death, reaching horrific perfection. Forced labor and annihilation through work at Mauthausen. In the granite quarries of Mauthausen, the Nazi ideology of annihilation through work reached its most literal and brutal implementation. Established on August 8, 1938, following the Nazi annexation of Austria, Mauthausen was designed around the exploitation of the nearby Wiener Graben quarry, where prisoners were worked to death in conditions so harsh that survival was measured in weeks rather than months. The concept of annihilation through work, Vernichtung durch Arbeit, was a deliberate Nazi strategy to exploit prisoners' labor while ensuring their death through inhumane conditions. While some skilled laborers were temporarily spared for economic utility, the policy was explicitly applied to Jews, Soviet POWs, and those deemed asocial or politically dangerous. In 1942–1943, Heinrich Himmler agreed to transfer approximately 20,000 convicted prisoners to concentration camps like Mauthausen for annihilation through work, with over 2/3 dying within 4 months. The Wiener Graben quarry became synonymous with death itself. Prisoners Prisoners were forced to extract granite blocks, some weighing 30–45 pounds for smaller blocks, and others over 75 pounds, carrying them up the notorious Stairs of Death, Toadsteege, a grueling 186-step climb that broke bodies and spirits with equal efficiency. Those assigned to the Strafkompanie penal company faced even harsher conditions, carrying blocks up to 50 kilograms on wooden frames. Prisoners worked 9–11 hours daily, with longer shifts in summer, denied adequate food, clothing, rest, or medical care. The work was deliberately designed to be exhausting and degrading, with prisoners often beaten by guards or capos during their ascent. Survivor Martin Baranek described Mauthausen as a place of physical and mental torture, where food was scarce and prisoners fell dead around us all the time. The deliberate starvation, combined with the backbreaking labor, ensured that even the strongest men would waste away within months of arrival. U.S. Navy Lieutenant Jack Taylor, a former prisoner who survived to testify about the camp's horrors, described the crushing labor conditions and systematic starvation that characterized daily life at Mauthausen. Prisoners were also forced to work in underground rocket assembly tunnels, where they produced weapons for the German war effort while slowly dying from malnutrition and exhaustion. As the war progressed and Germany faced severe labor shortages, Mauthausen's role evolved from pure punishment to economic exploitation. From 1943, prisoners were increasingly deployed to subcamps, where they worked for private companies like Steyr Daimler Puch AG, Messerschmitt GmbH, and the Reichswerke Hermann Göring. The deliberate nature of the killing through work is evidenced by the survival rates. Prisoners working for private companies were 40% less productive than free workers, but were preferred because they were cheaper and completely disposable. When workers became too weak to continue, they were simply replaced with fresh prisoners, creating a horrifying cycle of exploitation and death. Medical experiments added another layer of horror to Mauthausen's brutality. SS doctors like Hermann Richter removed vital organs from living prisoners to test survival limits, while Eduard Krebsbach killed untold numbers with phenol injections. These acts, combined with starvation, exposure, and disease, ensured that Mauthausen earned its reputation as one of the deadliest camps in the Nazi system. When American forces liberated Mauthausen on May 5, 1945, they found a camp that had consumed 95,000 lives in its 7 years of operation. The liberation revealed not just the physical evidence of systematic murder, but the broken bodies and spirits of the few thousand survivors who had somehow endured the unendurable. While prisoners collapsed carrying granite blocks up those deadly stairs, Soviet forces were unknowingly racing toward a discovery that would shock the world, a camp the Nazis hadn't had time to destroy. Liberation of Majdanek and evidence of gas chambers. On July 24, 1944, as Soviet forces swept through eastern Poland in their summer offensive, they achieved something unprecedented in the history of World War II. They liberated Majdanek concentration camp before the Germans could destroy the evidence of their crimes. What the Red Army found there would provide the first concrete, undeniable proof of Nazi extermination camps with intact gas chambers that could no longer be dismissed as propaganda or exaggeration. Majdanek, officially named Konzentrationslager Lublin, had been established in October 1941, just 1.25 miles from the city of Lublin, making it unusually visible compared to more isolated extermination camps. The camp's proximity to populated areas meant that the smoke from its crematoria and the screams of its victims were part of daily life for nearby residents, making claims of ignorance particularly hollow. The speed of the Soviet advance caught the Nazi authorities completely off guard. On the night of July 22–23, 1944, Soviet troops reached Majdanek, finding a camp that was largely intact. The Germans had managed to evacuate most prisoners, forcibly marching approximately 1,000 to Auschwitz, but had failed to destroy the critical infrastructure that would serve as evidence of their crimes. What the Soviets discovered was a perfectly preserved killing machine. Electrified barbed wire fences, watchtowers, barracks, crematoria, and gas chambers stood as monuments to systematic murder. Piles of ashes, human remains in mass graves, and over 800,000 pairs of shoes testified to the scale of the killings with a clarity that no amount of Nazi propaganda could obscure. The gas chambers at Majdanek were among the most significant evidence of Nazi extermination policies. Operational from October 1942 to September 1943, these chambers used both Zyklon B and carbon monoxide to murder prisoners. The Polish-Soviet Commission identified chambers housed in wooden barrack number 41, labeled bath and disinfection, to deceive victims about their true purpose. The physical evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Blue stains on the chamber walls, caused by Zyklon B's hydrogen cyanide, reacting with iron remained clearly visible, providing chemical proof of the chamber's use for mass murder. The commission found 535 canisters of Zyklon B within the camp, along with carbon monoxide containers, leaving no doubt about the methods of killing. The survivor testimonies provided harrowing details of the gas chamber operations. Jan Wolski, a Polish prisoner, testified to mass gassings of women, children, and the infirm, describing specific incidents such as the gassing of 87 Poles on March 15, 1944, and the murder of 158 children aged 2 to 10 in May 1943. Soviet journalist Konstantin Simonov and other correspondents were immediately brought to document the horrors, with reports such as W.H. Lawrence's article in the New York Times describing Majdanek as the most terrible place on the face of the earth. The Soviets' decision to invite international journalists ensured that the evidence would reach a global audience, though their coverage often downplayed the specific targeting of Jews. The largest single massacre at Majdanek had occurred just months before liberation. Operation Harvest Festival on November 3, 1943, saw approximately 18,000 Jews machine-gunned in trenches near the crematorium, with music played over loudspeakers to drown out the screams. The preservation of Majdanek provided forensic evidence that would prove crucial in post-war trials and in countering Holocaust denial. The camp's transformation into a state museum in 1947 made it one of the earliest Holocaust memorials, with preserved gas chambers serving as irrefutable proof of Nazi crimes. The gas chambers at Majdanek provided the first undeniable proof of systematic extermination, but the most disturbing discovery was yet to come, at a camp where the Nazis had transformed human beings into grotesque trophies. Buchenwald's tattooed skin and forced tours. In April 1945, as American forces liberated Buchenwald concentration camp, they discovered artifacts so grotesque and inhumane that they challenged the very limits of human comprehension. The collection of tattooed human skin found in the camp's pathology department represented a level of depravity that transformed victims into macabre decorative objects, revealing the Nazis' complete dehumanization of their prisoners. The practice of collecting tattooed skin at Buchenwald began in 1941 under SS camp Dr. Hans Müller, reportedly following directives from Berlin. Tattooed skin from deceased prisoners was systematically removed, tanned, and fashioned into objects like lampshades, pocket knife cases, and book bindings. These items were often presented as gifts among SS officers, reflecting a perverse fascination with human suffering transformed into personal accessories. SS Dr. Erich Wagner played a significant role in this grotesque practice, reportedly examining over 800 prisoners' tattoos for a dissertation that attempted to link tattooing to criminality. Survivor accounts, including testimony from Austrian prisoner chaplain Gustav Wegerer, indicate that hundreds of tattooed skin pieces were processed, with some sent to SS headquarters in Berlin for unknown purposes. The scale and systematic nature of this practice became clear through survivor testimonies. Witnesses like Bachalowski at the Nuremberg trials confirmed the ongoing presence of tattooed and tanned skin in Block 2, even after various commandants had departed, suggesting that this horrific practice persisted throughout the camp's operation under multiple administrations. When American forces discovered these artifacts, the impact was immediate and profound. On April 16, 1945, Major Purry E. Thompson ordered 1,000 Weimar residents to tour Buchenwald to confront the atrocities that had been committed virtually in their backyard. The tours were designed to dismantle local claims of ignorance and ensure that the German civilian population could never deny knowledge of what had been done in their name. Liberated prisoners prepared a display table outside the pathology barracks, showcasing human remains, including tattooed skin, shrunken heads, and the infamous lampshade made from human skin. These displays, photographed by U.S. Signal Corps member Walter Ciechurski, were distributed globally, shocking international audiences and serving as crucial evidence for war crimes trials. The New York Times reported on April 18, 1945, that the tours exposed German civilians to preserved organs in glass containers, more than a dozen pieces of preserved tattooed human skin, and a lamp with a stitched shade made of human skin. The reactions of Weimar residents were reportedly a mixture of horror, revulsion, and claims of ignorance that rang hollow given the camp's proximity to their daily lives. The forced tours continued beyond the initial shock, with a British parliamentary delegation visiting on April 21st, receiving artifacts like tattooed skin from prisoner chaplain Kurt Sitter. These items were later secured by the US Army Crime Unit for use as evidence in the Buchenwald trial, which ran from April to August 1947. Recent forensic analysis analysis has confirmed the authenticity of these horrific artifacts. A 2023 study by forensic biologist Mark Benecker verified that the lampshade was indeed made from human skin, refuting earlier claims that it might have been plastic. This scientific confirmation ensures that these artifacts cannot be dismissed by Holocaust deniers and serves as permanent evidence of Nazi brutality. The ethical questions surrounding these artifacts continue to challenge historians and memorial sites. The Buchenwald Memorial now refrains from displaying human remains, citing humanitarian concerns while retaining them as evidence of Nazi crimes. This approach reflects the ongoing tension between preserving historical evidence and respecting the dignity of victims whose suffering was transformed into objects of Nazi perverted pleasure. If you enjoyed watching this video, then go ahead and click on any of the cards on your screen for more.